Good to be with you. I'm Katie Tur. Residents of Greenland say they are scared of Donald Trump's threat to take over their island. They say they are a self-governing territory. They want respect. Don't tread on us. Don't send your military to take us over. And they're taking the president pretty seriously when he says he's going to do something like that. But it appears that some Republicans are not. They say the president doesn't actually mean entirely what he says. Senator Tommy Tuberville says what Trump has been saying is not a threat to Greenland. Speaker Mike Johnson says the U.S. is not at war with Greenland. And Senator John Kennedy insists Trump will not invade Greenland, that it would be, quote, weapons grade stupid. And he says Trump is not stupid. But Trump is adamant that the U.S. needs the territory and that all options to get it appear to still be on the table.
I may put a tariff on countries if they don't go along with Greenland, because we need Greenland for national security.
We are going to do something on Greenland, whether they like it or not, because if we don't do it, Russia or China will take over Greenland. If we don't do it the easy way, we're going to do it the hard way.
Okay, the easy way or the hard way. The hard way doesn't appear to be diplomacy or buying something, but some will say that Trump's talk is still just bluster, a way to force Denmark into selling Greenland, which officials there say they will not do. Buying or taking, there are now more than a handful of Republicans who are telling the president that he does not have the political power to do so. Here's Senator Lisa Murkowski talking to NBC News as she and a group of lawmakers visit Denmark to reassure our ally.
And I think you will find that support in Congress to acquire Greenland in any way is not there.
Joining us, MS Now congressional reporter Michael Schnell, MS Now international reporter Inez de la Catera in Nuuk, Greenland, senior writer at The Dispatch, and MS Now contributor David Drucker, and former U.S. ambassador to Denmark, Rufus Gifford. Michael, we're hearing from a lot of lawmakers on Greenland, including lawmakers like Don Bacon, who say that this would be the end of Donald Trump's presidency. Would it really? Is there really that much of an uprising underneath the surface regarding Greenland?
I mean, look, Katie, one of the themes of the Trump administration, both the first term and now this one, is how far can the president go until he draws that criticism from Republicans? What is too far for Republicans up on Capitol Hill? What can they tolerate? It seems like one of those things that may be a bridge too far and intolerable for those GOP lawmakers is this rhetoric about Greenland. The president and the White House saying that all options are on the table when it comes to Greenland, including military intervention, is really causing concern among Republicans by and large. And you mentioned Don Bacon. He's been one of the loudest critics of this conversation and this floating, saying as recently as this week to a local outlet that if the president were to go forward with military intervention to take control of Greenland, it would be impeachable. And he believes that a large number of Republicans would follow him in that right. So certainly this is something that, of all the conversation we've had about President Trump drawing concerns from Republicans, wondering if it's a bridge too far for them to be comfortable with, the Greenland conversation, it seems like, has been in that territory. Now, I say it seems like because, of course, with the Republicans on Capitol Hill, you don't give them credit for going against the president until it actually happens. Case in point being this conversation and this situation involving the Venezuela War Powers Resolution. We saw 5 of those Republicans break ranks and vote to advance that War Powers Resolution. But a week later, after a heavy lobbying campaign from the White House, 2 of them flipped and essentially killed that effort. So we would have to see how a conversation about Greenland and the repercussions would take place if there were something like military intervention in the country. But certainly Republicans, led by, as you mentioned, Don Bacon, are making it very clear that would be a massive problem for them.
Yeah, no, what's interesting about this, and David, you write this, is whether that line shifts. And often before that line starts to shift, we see lawmakers, Republican lawmakers, try to interpret what Donald Trump really means, to try to say, oh, he might be saying that, but what he really intends is this. And we've been hearing that again from lawmakers today. You read all about it. You say this: Trump knows what he's saying and knows what he's doing or what he wants to do. When he speaks and when he acts, it's with deliberate intent. Congressional Republicans who oppose an American invasion of Greenland might want to ponder that rather than soothe themselves with fantasies that Trump's tough talk is about, quote, leverage.
Yeah, well, I think, Katie, when you look at the second term, and we're just about a year in, I think it's pretty clear that the president does what he says he's going to do. And when he's talking about something, it's not just conceptual. It's not just about poking the bear. I think in the first presidency, it was defensible for Republicans to presume that Trump didn't totally understand the ramifications of things that he would talk about. He was often advised against doing things that he wanted. So in retrospect, I think he should have been taken seriously then. He clearly needs to be taken seriously in the second presidency. But Republicans are caught in this box of disagreeing with President Trump, but not wanting to publicly disagree with him. And so they try to send these subtle signals to the president to back off, to look at something differently. And most of the time, it doesn't work. It works occasionally. I think we also need to point out here, and I'm sure you're going to get into this, that the president's claim that we need to acquire Greenland or China and Russia will are specious. Republicans understand this, at least Republicans on the Hill, and they're specious because Greenland is owned by Denmark. Denmark is a part of NATO. Russia and China are not going to make a move against a NATO territory. It would trigger Article 5 and potentially a huge conflagration. And so this whole idea that we can't use existing agreements to proliferate more military bases on Greenland to do the things the president wants to do is just not true. And so it's another reason, I think, why the president should be taken seriously here, because he's so far proven that he does not back down, even in the face of criticism and falling poll numbers.
I'm so happy you brought that up, because I was thinking about that very thing this morning, that the idea that we have to have it to deter China and Russia, and we're the only ones that can defend Greenland. It is a NATO country. It would be like Russia or China going after the UK or going after France or Poland. I mean, there is a reason why NATO exists. NATO is a collective of security between a number of nations. So it is as if we do own Greenland. On that note, and as you are there, you've been speaking to people. I mentioned at the top that people are taking this seriously. Tell me more about what you're hearing and what you're hearing from lawmakers in the territory.
Yeah, they're still worried, Katie. They're also waiting to see what happens next. I will say in recent days, we have been seeing this military buildup here in Greenland as the Danes and European allies ramp up their military presence here in Greenland and around the island. People here have been telling me that they find that reassuring. They're grateful that the Europeans are sending in reinforcements. At the same time, there's something a little bit bizarre about seeing these, Danish Navy ships around Nuuk, or we saw Danish C-130s landing at the airport last night. This is such a peaceful, remote part of the world, and I think it's part of what people love about living in Greenland is that they feel they're kind of isolated from the rest of the madness happening around the world. So there is something a little bit bizarre about seeing these ships and planes here in Greenland. We were at the airport watching one of those planes land last night. I asked some people who had gathered there to watch the plane's arrival what they thought about military buildup in their country. I'll let you listen to what one woman had to say.
Now he's talking about it's not only for the security, he just wants the country, but we're not for sale. So that's our main goal, to explain that we are still people, really real people living here, and we want to be respected for that.
And she went on to say that she thinks this might be more about Greenland's vast, largely untapped natural resources. And we are expecting Greenlanders to make their voices heard tomorrow. There are two big demonstrations planned, one in Copenhagen outside the U.S. Embassy and one here in Nuuk outside the U.S. consulate, Katie.
All right, let me play Von Hilliard, who just spoke with the president, asked him about NATO and whether he would feel comfortable attacking NATO.
Mr. President, do you commit to not militarily engaging NATO partners?
I don't talk about that.
Mr. President,
You're not willing to commit to not attacking a NATO partner?
You urge protesters.
Commit is a better word here. He's asking the president, will he commit to not attacking our allies? And the president, ambassador, says, I don't talk about that. What?
What do you say, Katie? Honestly, what do you say at this point? I mean, this is such an extraordinary time. am happy to see folks, in particular Republican members of Congress, start to speak out about this. Frankly, I wish that they had done it a year ago when he first made his threats vis-a-vis Greenland. I can tell you this, that whether or not Americans take these threats seriously, whether or not Republican members of Congress do, our great friends in Denmark and Greenland do. They take it extraordinarily seriously. So it is unthinkable that during our lifetimes, the President of the United States would not take military engagement against a NATO ally who has fought and died alongside us for the last 80 years. It's extraordinary that a U.S. president won't take that off the table.
So what could he do in Greenland by owning it that he can't do currently in Greenland, being a part of the alliance?
Absolutely nothing, Katie, is the answer to the question. So, and this is what drives me crazy about it, because the goals that they articulate, the national security goals and the economic goals, are achievable today. As David mentioned, we used to have 17 military bases on Greenland. It was the U.S., it was our administrations, Republican and Democrats alike, including Trump 1, who made a decision not to reinvest in Greenland, which we could do. And we have a treaty dating back to 1951 that would allow us to do that. In addition to that, there are existing relationships that we have with bilaterally, but with Greenland, that would allow us to go and mine for rare earth minerals. You know who would love that more than anybody else? The Danes and the Greenlanders. So these justifications are just bogus. They don't make sense. And it's very clear. To me, it's very clear. So it is hard to see.
Is there something else that we're missing here? I mean, if the U.S. owned Greenland and wanted to mine it for its resources, are there limits to mining it for its resources? Limits to what we can put on the island? Are there limits that Donald Trump wants to be able to blow through that he believes he'll be able to do by owning it? I mean, I'm trying to figure out something other than Donald Trump likes how big it is on a map and wants to put his name on it.
Well, I have probably little doubt that processes associated with mining could get easier if you remove all, say, environmental protections and environmental regulations and whatnot were the U.S. to own it. I suppose that's possible and maybe even logical. That being said, this can all get done. I mean, all you got to do is sit across the table from one of our best allies in the world, in Denmark and Greenland, and they would gladly make that deal. That's what they tried to do at the White House 2 days ago, and I don't think they got very far. I also want to say one thing. David made the case about national security. I would take it one step further, that actually this weakens American national security, that the idea of weakening NATO, all that does is empower our adversaries in Russia and China. I think this idea actually makes the United States weaker, not stronger.
So, David, is this, as I asked Michael up top, is this the red line? I mean, if this came to pass...
It's such a great question. But no, you have to. By the way, it's the relevant question, and you should ask it. And you just don't know. You know, Michael was talking about this. You never put this in the bank if and until it happens. I mean, here's the thing. It's not about, what Republicans or what the Congress broadly can do, because without a direct national security threat, right? I mean, there's really a difficult argument, if any, to make that the president can unilaterally order military force to take over a foreign territory, right? And Congress could do something about that, but would it? I think this is a lot more complicated than just Republicans in Congress. I think a lot of top military generals would be very uncomfortable with this. It's possible we'd see a whole host of resignations. So I think this is a lot more difficult for President Trump internally, both politically and militarily, in terms of the military politics of all of this, not to mention the politics on Capitol Hill and throughout Washington. But when you're just talking about what's finally going to be the red line, you just can't really say, given the past 5-6 years, because we've seen this movie before. Everybody says he doesn't mean it, and then he does it. And then maybe momentarily they put the brakes on, but then they put the gas pedal back on. And part of that is because, and of course, I'm like a broken record here, Katie, Republican voters continue to think very highly of President Trump. So even though his numbers overall are poor, and it's causing Republicans a lot of heartburn as we approach the midterm elections, and they could lose a lot of seats, Republican voters still feel very good about President Trump, generally speaking, and that's what gives Republicans on the Hill pause every time this question arises.
Yeah, that's a good point. All right, David, always good to have you. Enjoy that beautiful day. Michael and Inez and Ambassador, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Really smart conversation. Coming up next, Venezuela's opposition leader gave her Nobel Peace Prize to President Trump. What did she get in return? Why would the president accept somebody else's prize? Lots of good questions here. Plus, is a blue wave coming? What is pointing to the Democrats taking back the House in November? We're back in 90 seconds. President Trump finally got the Nobel Peace Prize he's long been vying for. In a meeting with the president yesterday, Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado presented the president with her 2025 award. The White House says he does plan to keep it. The Norwegian Nobel Committee has previously stated that a prize cannot be revoked, shared, or transferred. Yeah, you can give him the medal, but that doesn't mean he won the prize. Joining us, MS Now senior White House reporter Vaughn Hilliard. I struggle with this because I just can't wrap my mind around the accepting of somebody else's prize. It's just a strange thing to do.
And a photographer caught an image of Machado walking out of the White House yesterday carrying a bag with a gold sort of Donald Trump signature emblem on a bag, seemingly a transfer of award for what was ever inside of that gift bag, Katie.
Like a hat or something, or a T-shirt.
Right, and the big question coming out of this was understanding that a few days prior to that, right, Sean Hannity all but set her up to be like, well, have you thought about giving him the award? And she was like, I would potentially share it with him. And then days later, here she was at the White House, literally giving him the award and the medal. And the question coming out of the meeting is, would that get Donald Trump to ultimately suggest that the opposition leader who fled Venezuela, went to Oslo, and now finds herself in Washington, D.C., would he openly suggest that she should be leading Venezuela and that the Maduro regime should all but step aside? Well, this was his response just a few moments ago on that.
Why align with Delcy Rodriguez and the remnants of the Maduro regime and not with Machado, who has the support of the Venezuelan people?
Well, if you ever remember a place called Iraq where everybody was fired, every single person, the police, the generals, everybody was fired, and they ended up being ISIS. Instead of just getting down to business, they ended up being ISIS. So I remember that. But I'll tell you, I had a great meeting yesterday by a person who I have a lot of respect for.
A few reporters, Katie, then tried to yell at the president right after that whether he wanted Machado to be leading Venezuela, and he turned and he walked to his helicopter to head down to Florida without answering the question. So exactly what Machado's fate is moving forward after this meeting isn't clear.
There is some 2020 looking back at Iraq, and there are folks, foreign policy folks, who have criticized the removal of everybody in the Saddam Hussein government, all the Baathists, and said that that was not a good idea in retrospect. So I understand why the president is trying to say that. Vaughn, I don't know if you've done this yet, but I haven't been to the White House in a few years. I understand there's a lot of gold everywhere now. I know there's a lot of gold in the Oval Office. I can see it, but now there's a lot of gold signage all around the White House. What is going on?
We're, to be truthful with you, Katie, we were just out there for his departure, and we were having conversations of whether there was a bust, a statue there that was new or not, because we're trying to keep up with all the new additions. There's now this gold cursive announcing that this, in fact, is the Rose Garden. There's the Presidential Walk of Fame with all of the pictures. There's, of course, the Rose Garden was effectively mostly ripped up, and they put down the new, Mar-a-Lago-esque patio down. It's kind of hard to keep up with the changes. Of course, the other conversation here in the West Wing is the extent to which the briefing room will exist, and will the president seek to try to upend this end once they finish construction on the East Wing? There's a lot of conversations, and there's always.
Is he going to try to make it a pool again, like Kennedy used to have? Yeah, the signage and the lettering, the gold cursive lettering for the West Wing is interesting. It just. Who needs to know that that's, everyone knows that's the West Wing. Why does it need a sign? It's not a It's not a resort, not a golf club.
Everybody
Vaughn
has
Hilliard.
different style, Katie.
Vaughn, thank you so much. Good to have you. Coming up next, was the shooting of Renee Good part of a pattern? God, that's quite a turn. What MS Now found after a review of more than a dozen cases where federal agents have fired their guns at people in their cars.
Him and his administration say that there is no accountability for ICE and border control agents. And that has resulted in an American citizen being shot in the face, American citizens being put in a cell designated for American citizens at an ICE facility, people being held for 3-4 hours without notification to their family, to their lawyers, to their members of Congress, and being disappeared somewhere in this country. It has led with a 6-month-old baby being hospitalized. This is clear brutality that we are facing.
House Democrats held a field hearing today on the surge of ICE officers in Minneapolis, a move they argue is leading to an increase in violent confrontations in the Twin Cities. Confrontations like this one, which appears to show a federal agent repeatedly kneeing a man in the face as other agents pin him down. The Trump administration has maintained that the agents involved in these incidents have been justified in their use of force, all acting within standard DHS operating procedure after receiving a threat to their safety during routine traffic stops. But it happens a lot. An MS Now review of court records found more than a dozen incidents where immigration agents shot at civilians in their cars, including 2 in the week since Renee Good was killed. Joining us, MS Now reporter David Noriega and former acting director of ICE, John Sandweg. David, I understand you have new reporting today. Lay it out.
Katie, the gist is that the killing of Renee Good in Minneapolis is very much and very clearly part of a pattern. It's a very specific and incontrovertible pattern that relates both to the shootings themselves, what happens in the field, and also what happens after. So this is specifically not just excessive use of force or alleged excessive use of force by federal immigration agents, but specifically agents with ICE and the Border Patrol firing their guns at people in their cars. It's happened at least 14 times since July around the country, and it's directly attributable to this dramatic change in federal immigration enforcement tactics that we first saw here in LA in June, and which involves these agents sort of going around making indiscriminate stops, trying to detain as many people as possible, rather than the kinds of targeted operations that these agencies used to do before. The thing that my reporting has focused on, though, Katie, the most is what these agencies do after these people get shot at. Because in every single one of these cases, DHS has come out promptly making statements that are the exact same substantively as the statements it made after the killing of Renee Good, meaning, publicly accusing the people who were shot at of trying to use their vehicles to hit, ram, run over, etc., federal agents in their vehicles. But in very few of these cases do those claims actually, withstand scrutiny. I want to talk about one specific case, which is one of the first ones I was paying attention to. I was tracking this, by the way, before Renee Good, so this has been happening for a while. Some of the people that I spoke to, defense attorneys, law enforcement experts, said that, the killing of Renee Good was more or less inevitable given what we'd been seeing in the months prior. Something like that was going to happen. But let's focus on the case of Francisco Longoria. It happened here in SoCal in San Bernardino. He was stopped in his car with his teenage son in the passenger seat, another man in the backseat, by Border Patrol agents, where you're seeing here in these 2 separate cell phone videos. One of the Border Patrol agents smashes the glass, another thing that happens frequently, and then Longoria drives away. In these 2 videos, as well as in a video from a surveillance camera across the street, it's very clear that there were no federal agents or federal vehicles in front of or in any way in the way of Longoria's vehicle when he drove away, and yet that was the moment where a Border Patrol agent discharged his firearm at him multiple times. The feds charged Longoria, the DOJ charged Longoria Longoria with assault on an officer, but that case was dropped. Prosecutors dropped. They voluntarily withdrew the case within less than a month of filing it, and that's not the only one of these cases where exactly that has happened, or cases have been thrown out by judges. Only 4 of the cases that we looked at, Katie, actually have an ongoing criminal prosecutions, which is a much smaller number than you would expect from all the instances that DHS has publicly accused people of assaulting federal officers, which is, of course, a very serious and prosecutable offense.
The other argument that we hear from people who are defending ICE or defending the agents is that these people are not listening to commands. They're not rolling down their windows. They're not opening their doors. They're not getting out of the car when ICE agents or other immigration agents are telling them to do something. Or in the case that David was just outlining, the guy driving away. Does that justify discharging a weapon? Does it justify forcibly dragging somebody out of a car and holding them to the ground? Where is the line on that justification?
Look, I'll limit my answer to shooting at vehicles because that is the thing that I've been studying very specifically. And I can tell you emphatically that every law enforcement expert I spoke to, including a couple of chiefs of large American urban police departments, has told me that shooting at vehicles, especially moving vehicles, really flagrantly goes against what has been established best practices in American law enforcement for decades. All the major police departments in the U.S. are trained very specifically not to shoot at moving vehicles. Not only that, but also not to put themselves in front of moving vehicles or vehicles that could be moving in order to sort of bring such a situation to bear, Katie.
So, John, I know you and I have talked about this as well. In the week since Renee Good's death, the support for ICE has plummeted across the country, and the support for abolishing ICE has risen. What do you make of the demand to get rid of the agency altogether now?
Okay, look, the agency serves an important purpose in the U.S. Law enforcement ecosystem. The truth is, there are bad people in this country. There are violent felons some of whom have been deported and snuck back into the country, who are committing serious crimes in our cities today. There are people who commit serious crimes while in this country on a visa or after they've overstayed or crossed the border unlawfully. And I think there's broad consensus we need to get those people out of the country. What people are objecting to is what they're seeing on TV. And what David's reporting, I think, highlights is we're seeing officers who are out of position, who are dealing in situations they haven't dealt with that are very delicate, that are difficult to manage. As you point out, sometimes these people are resistant. They're not following the commands of the officers, but we're reverting to escalating to, rather than de-escalating or using alternative tactics that other law enforcement agencies would use, resorting to these excessive, extreme uses of force, I guess I would say. And my point is that is what the public is reacting to. ICE has always been controversial. You and I talked about this, but the reality is ICE as an agency under both Republican and Democrat administrations has arrested millions of people and done so without the images we're seeing on TV. And so I guess my point is that while I think the public supports the idea of getting those bad people off the street, they certainly don't support what they're seeing every night on the television.
Deaths in ICE custody have also gone up, and the Washington Post is out with new reporting today that says that a man in the in a detainment center in El Paso, that the medical examiner is going to rule that his death inside this detainment center was a homicide. The daughter spoke to the medical examiner and recorded it, and the employee said a doctor there is listing the preliminary cause of death as asphyxia due to neck and chest compression, which means Lunas Campo, the detainee, did not get enough oxygen because of pressure on his neck and chest. Pending the results of a toxicology report, the staffer said on the recording, our doctors believing that we're going to be listing this as a homicide. That would be some version of choking. ICE has said that the death was because the detainee was observed in distress and gave no actual cause of death. So there's not a fulsome statement from DHS on this quite yet. But given not only the images that we're seeing and the stories we're hearing about from just innocent bystanders who are trying to go through or people who are dying in ICE custody, is the agency, is it reformable? Or is this a scenario where you take out the name, you take out the agency, you put it into another department, and you start to rebuild it from the ground up? Because as you said, John, they do some critical work.
Yeah, I think the idea of rebranding the agency, that's not, ICE is going to need to restore that culture. And I think what concerns me, Katie, is a couple of things quickly. I do think it's important to note that we've diminished the oversight and accountability within the agency. In my experience, I want to be super clear about this. The people who go to work every day at ICE, the people I worked with, the people I deal with now in my professional capacity, they don't go to work looking to use excessive force, and they take the care and custody of detainees in custody very seriously. But I think what our leaders say does matter. And there is certainly truth to say when we rush to automatically defend the agents, when we start dismantling the oversight, and when we have this culture of saying kind of we want to meet any opposition with extreme aggression, all of that can make a difference. And what concerns me most, though, is are we losing those senior ICE people who recognize that there's a way of doing this job while you treat people with dignity and respect, where you treat as sacrosanct the people who are in your custody? Are we losing those people, and how long is it going to take to rebuild that culture? And Katie, very quickly, we have 10,000 new ICE agents coming on board. ICE is going to look a lot different a year from now than it does today. And that I think, especially if we shorten the training, as we've talked about, that is also very alarming, I think, in terms of what the culture will be like in this new ICE.
By the way, DHS emailed the Washington Post, and here's what they said about the death of Lunas Campos. Died after attempting to take his own life. Campos violently resisted the security staff and continued to attempt to take his own life, according to DHS. That's their version of it. All right, John, really good to have you. David, really good to have you as well. Such an important conversation that is obviously very complicated. Coming up next, the Cook Political Report just shifted 18 races toward Democrats. What does that mean for control of the House? The 2026 midterms could be House Democrats to lose 10 months out from the election. The Cook Political Report released a new rating of competitive seats and shifted 18 House races toward Democrats. 8 of them moving out of the likely Democrat column to solid blue. Another 10 races shifting toward Democrats, leaving Republicans with fewer toss-up races. All right, joining us, Cook Political Report senior editor and elections analyst Dave Wasserman. All right, lay it out for me.
So right now, we have 211 races that at least lean towards the Democrats, lean likely or solid D. We have 206 races that at least lean to the Republicans, and then 18 toss-ups. What that means is that Republicans, in our view, would need to win 2/3 of the toss-up column to hold their House majority, which isn't impossible. But Democrats are clear favorites at this point for the House. And we've known this for a while, but where these races fall in relation to each other, we've had extensive conversations with strategists and ad makers and pollsters and candidates from both parties to assess how these races are moving. And what we've seen is weakness for Republican incumbents in these single-digit Trump districts. Keep in mind, there are about 15 seats that Republicans hold that Donald Trump carried by less than 5 points. And a lot of these contests feature Democrats who have national security backgrounds similar to 2018. And we believe that redistricting is not going to safeguard the Republican majority to the extent the party had hoped.
What's driving this move? Is there a single policy or a single event that's forcing voters to rethink their positions?
It comes down to President Trump's standing with independent voters in particular, but also Democrats' enthusiasm advantage. And a couple of the races that moved in these latest ratings feature large Hispanic populations. For example, Texas's 34th district, Vicente Gonzalez, California's 13th district in the Central Valley, Adam Gray. What we've seen nationally is Donald Trump carried about 48% of the Hispanic vote in 2024, but according to our poll tracker, his approval rating among Hispanic voters is 35%. That's almost double the erosion in support we've seen for Trump among other voters. Among independents, Trump won about 48% of self-ID'd independents in in 2024. According to our poll tracker, he sits at 30%. This is consistent with the type of advantage for Democrats that we saw in 2018. We've seen it in special elections like Tennessee 7, which featured a 13-point swing towards the Democrats from 2024. Democrats only need a fraction of that swing to retake the House majority this time. I'd say the warning sign, though, for Democrats is money. They don't have nearly the money advantage that they had 8 years ago during Trump's first term. MAGA Inc. PAC ended 2025 with $304 million in the bank. The DNC only has about a fifth of the cash on hand that the RNC does. And most observers expect the Supreme Court will strike down limits on coordination between parties and candidates, which could give Republican candidates more money to try and localize their races and portray Democrats as unacceptable alternatives.
How do you explain that? I mean, we've seen money differences before, disparity between the two parties, but this one is especially stark. Why? Why are Democrats not raising any money, it seems, or not a lot of money?
Well, they're raising money, but they don't have the mammoth advantage over Republicans that we saw in previous cycles. And I attribute that to fatigue on the part of Democrats who've poured money into a lot of reach races for Senate and House the past few years, and it hasn't necessarily paid dividends, particularly in Senate races. And the other component is that the president, the White House, they've been able to bend donors to their will. We've seen big stakeholders, big business leaders contribute millions, seven-figure checks, eight-figure checks to MAGA Inc. And the outstanding question is, how much is that PAC going to spend on Republican candidates' behalf, or are they going to hoard a lot of that money for 2028?
Yeah, and I've heard from Democratic donors who are a little bit nervous about donating to Democrats and finding themselves suddenly in an IRS investigation. They're worried about retribution from the president. Dave Wasserman, really good to have you. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Katie.
Still ahead, what President Trump says led him to hold off on striking Iran. Protests in Iran have quieted down, and so has, it appears, the threat of a U.S. military response. Last hour, President Trump told reporters he convinced himself to stand down. He even thanked the Iranian government for canceling, quote, the hanging of over 800 people. The weeks-long protests there have led to more than 2,600 deaths and the arrest of thousands more, according to a human rights news agency. Joining us, co-host of MS Now's The Weekend Primetime, Ayman Mohyeldin. Ayman, really good to have you.
Great to be with you.
Was it just the sheer amount of killing that got people off the streets?
It seems right now that the protests have at least subsided because of the overwhelming force that the Iranian government has used, right? I mean, they basically killed their way through these protests over the last several weeks. You mentioned the number of 2,600. Some activists are citing numbers that are much harder. It's very difficult to verify that right now. But it seems for now the protests, while there are still some in some pockets of the country, they are not what they were just a couple of days ago because of the regime using brutal force to crack down on them.
What has been the response regionally?
There's a lot of apprehension about what happens in Iran because of the fact that a failed Iran, a collapsed Iran could spill over into the region, right? And a country that comes under attack, as some were suspecting could happen a couple of days ago, could have Iran retaliate across the region. There is no country in the region that looks at the Iranian regime and says, this is a good country, this is a great ally, these are amazing people in terms of the leadership of that country. Nobody has that, but everybody has a lot more fear of what a failed, collapsed Iranian government could look like for the region and how much that would destabilize the region.
The president has said in the past he's going to take some time to think about what to do with Iran and then suddenly strikes Iran. Yeah. So are they confident that the president saying he's convinced himself to stand down, that that's the end of it?
No, not at all. In fact, I think one of the most important things for people who track Iran over the course of the last several months has been that their posture has changed significantly since the 12-day war with Israel back over the summer, followed by the U.S. attack on Iran. And the reason why is because that came amidst negotiations with the Americans. If you remember, there was a negotiation period where they were trying to negotiate the nuclear deal. Ultimately, that expired. On the day that expired, Israel launched the attack against Iran. And it really caught the Iranians by surprise. A lot of their senior leadership was decimated in terms of their military leadership. And so the Iranians, since that moment, have been on a war footing. And they have projected as much to their allies in the region, saying that if they came under attack this time around, they would completely retaliate against several countries in the region, as well as Israel. And that may have been a factor in President Trump's calculation. And so even now, even though Donald Trump has signaled that there may not be a strike or the strike is not as imminent.
The USS Ford is on its way back from Venezuela, and it's going to take about a week for it to get there. And that's our biggest
They are not acting as if the country is not on a war footing. In fact, every Iranian leader has come out over the last several days of protests and said, Iran is prepared for war. We are ready to kind of repel any attack.
So what is the region preparing for if Iran does strike? What do they believe Iran's capability is?
Well, Iran's capabilities are twofold. One, domestically and externally. From a regional perspective, the Iranians are capable of attacking any of the countries that are in the immediate vicinity. That includes the entire Persian Gulf, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE, Bahrain. A lot of American military assets are in there. Of course, Central Command is in Qatar. The Fifth Fleet is in Bahrain. And then beyond that, they can certainly attack, as they demonstrated over the summer, Israel. And that requires American capabilities to defend Israel because of Iron Dome, interceptors, radar interceptors, all kinds of resources that have to be deployed that the Iranians would be able to attack as well.
Curious on a big picture question for you, Eamon. How does the region see Donald Trump? Do they see him as a positive over this last year in the region or a negative?
I think it depends on who you ask. Certainly some countries in the Gulf have welcomed the way he has taken a much stronger approach towards Iran compared to, let's say, for example, President Obama, who tried to negotiate with Iran and enter the JCPOA. I don't think a lot of countries necessarily respect Donald Trump, but they certainly appreciate the way that they can deal with him, which is very transactional. They could literally just say to him, here's what we want. He tells them what he wants, and they're able to kind of cobble together some kind of deal that will exist for short term.
So in the past, what was the difference? That there were demands on human rights and...
There was a lot of lecturing. There was a lot of, like, for example, like if you look at some of the deals that were taking place that led to the Abraham Accords, there were things that Donald Trump was willing to completely give to countries like F-35 fighter jets, recognize the Western Sahara for Morocco. So these were tangible wins for those countries that they were saying, like, well, okay, if you want me to make that deal with Israel in exchange for that, I'm willing to do that. So that's very different than, for example, the United States under previous administrations who would say, we have to take these issues one by one and evaluate whether or not this is something the United States wants to do.
Well, that's interesting. All right, Eamon Moyadeen, thanks.
Always a pleasure.
Thanks for coming on. Appreciate it. You can see more of Eamon on the weekend primetime, Saturday and Sunday, 6 to 9 Eastern, right here on MS Now. Thanks again, Eamon. Sit tight. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro joins me in the next hour of Katie Tur Reports, which starts after a very short break.